Welcome to Levy Stories, where real life stories come to life. If you're fascinated by true, emotional, and surprising stories, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Your support motivates me to keep sharing these unforgettable stories with you. Now, let's dive into today's story. One quiet Sunday afternoon, a knock on the bathroom door changed everything, and I was not prepared for what happened next. It was a typical Sunday, the kind that lulls you into a false sense of calm. The sun was high in the sky, casting soft rays through the curtains of our small suburban home, creating a warmth that made everything feel just a bit too slow. Sundays had always been my day to unwind, to take a breather from the week and just escape into my thoughts or get lost in a video game. But this Sunday was different. Though I didn't realize it at first, I headed to the bathroom after lunch, planning to stay in there for a while. You know how it is. When you're just looking for a quiet moment to yourself, I liked to scroll through my phone, maybe play a game or two, and just enjoy the solitude. The bathroom had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could shut out the world and take a moment to breathe. Little did I know that what was supposed to be a regular, uneventful afternoon was about to take a turn. As I sat there, scrolling through my phone, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Our house was always full of little noises: the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of the TV in the living room. But there was something different about these footsteps, something deliberate. They were soft but purposeful, stopping just outside the bathroom door. And then came the knock. It wasn't an urgent knock, nothing that screamed, "Come out right now." But it was strange enough to make me pause. My mom's voice followed, sounding a bit too cheerful. "Hey, sweetheart, you in there?" I frowned, glancing at the closed door. "Yeah, Mom, I'll be out in a minute." "All right," she replied, her voice still bright, a little too bright. "Take your time." I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, and I went back to my phone, trying to brush off the odd interaction. My mom wasn't the type to check in on me in the bathroom. We weren't a family that needed constant updates on where we were or what we were doing. But today, for some reason, she felt the need to stop by and say hi through the door. Weird, but not worth overthinking, or so I thought. Minutes passed, and the quiet returned. The house was still, save for the occasional sound of the wind brushing against the windows. I tried to relax, but something about that knock lingered in the back of my mind. My mom wasn't acting like herself. She hadn't done anything out of line. But the tone of her voice had struck me as off. I shook my head, trying to shake off the sense of unease. Maybe she was just in a good mood. I told myself maybe she wanted to talk about something later, or maybe she was just checking in. But no matter how many explanations I came up with, I couldn't fully dismiss the strangeness of it. And then, just as I was starting to relax again, I heard her footsteps return. This time they were slower, more hesitant. My pulse quickened for reasons I couldn't explain. She was standing outside the door again. "But why? Everything okay in there?" Her voice came, quieter this time, almost hesitant. Yeah," I replied, my voice cracking just slightly. "I'll be out soon." There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched just a little too long before she responded. "All right." But she didn't move. I could hear her standing there, just outside the door, and my heart started to pound in my chest. I had no idea why I felt so on edge, but there was no denying the tension building in the air. I stood up, glancing at myself in the mirror. I looked the same tousled hair, same hoodie, same everything. But the feeling in the room wasn't the same. There was something hanging in the air, something heavy and unsettling. After what felt like an eternity, I finally heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway again. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding, my body relaxing ever so slightly. But the unease didn't go away. I finished up in the bathroom, splashing some water on my face as if that would wash away the strange tension that had settled over me. The water felt cool against my skin, but it didn't do much to clear my head. With a towel wrapped around my waist, I opened the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway. Everything looked normal. The same old pictures on the walls, the same soft lighting filtering in through the windows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like the air in the house had shifted ever so slightly. I walked down the hallway, my bare feet patting softly against the hardwood floor. I passed by my mom's room. The door closed as usual, and made my way to my own room at the end of the hall. But as I reached for the doorknob, I paused. Something caught my eye. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. My mom never went into my room without asking. Ever. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find her standing inside. But the room was empty. Everything was in its place. My bed neatly made, my clothes piled up on the chair in the corner, my desk a cluttered mess of papers and random stuff. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, my mom's perfume. It was subtle, barely there, but it was enough to confirm what I had already suspected. She had been in here, but why? And what had she been doing? I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind racing. Maybe she had just come in to tidy up, or maybe she needed something from my room, but that didn't make sense. She never did that. And the fact that she hadn't mentioned it when she knocked on the bathroom door earlier only made it more confusing. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Why had she come into my room without saying anything? Why had she lingered outside the bathroom like that? And why did it feel like there was something she wasn't telling me? But the story didn't end there. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself replaying the events over and over in my head, trying to make sense of the strange tension that had settled between us. Something was going on, something I couldn't put my finger on, and as much as I wanted to brush it off as nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change, drastically. The days following that strange encounter in the bathroom were anything but normal. There was a change in the air between me and my mom that I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't like we had a falling out or some big argument, but there was an invisible line that seemed to have been crossed, and neither of us acknowledged it. I wasn't sure how to bring it up or if I should even try, but there was an unspoken tension between us, but I couldn't figure out its source. Almost like it was waiting for something. It started with small things, like the way she'd watch me a little too closely when I walked into the room. I'd catch her staring, only for her to quickly look away, pretending to be busy with something else. Or how she seemed to be around more, always finding a reason to be in the same room as me. It felt like every time I tried to carve out some time for myself, she'd show up, sitting in the living room when I was there, cooking in the kitchen when I was grabbing a snack, or even folding laundry on the couch when I was playing video games. At first, I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to coincidence. Maybe she just wanted to spend more time together, or maybe she had something on her mind and didn't know how to talk about it. But the more it happened, the more it became clear that it wasn't just random. There was an underlying reason, something neither of us was willing to confront. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching TV. The soft glow of the screen flickered in the dark living room, and the only sounds were the low hum of the show and the occasional clinking of the ice in her glass. I was trying to focus on the show, but my mind kept drifting back to the way she was sitting next to me, closer than usual, so close that I could feel the heat radiating from her body. My heart began to beat faster, and I couldn't figure out why. She didn't say much, just the occasional comment about the show, but every word she spoke seemed heavier, like there was something behind it. I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, but all I could think about was the space between us, or, rather, the lack of space. My skin tingled every time her arm brushed mine, and I found myself wondering why I was suddenly so hyper-aware of every tiny movement she made. As the credits rolled and the show ended, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe it was the tension of sitting so close for so long, but I was ready to get up, to put some distance between us. I reached for the remote to turn off the TV, but before I could move, she spoke. "You've really grown up," she said, her voice quiet, almost thoughtful. I paused, the remote still in my hand, unsure of how to respond. "Yeah, I guess," I muttered, glancing at her out of the corner of my eye. She was looking at me in a way that made my stomach twist, like she was seeing me for the first time, not just as her son, but as someone else, someone older. There was a long silence after that, the kind that made my palms sweat. I wasn't sure what to say, and it felt like the wrong move to stay silent. But before I could think of something, she did something I didn't expect. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand on mine. It was a gentle touch, but it felt like a bolt of electricity shot through me. My breath caught in my throat, and my first instinct was to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just sat there, frozen, my heart racing as her fingers curled slightly around mine. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. Her hand lingered for a moment longer before she slowly pulled it away, leaving a cold, empty feeling where her warmth had been. I finally exhaled, though my mind was spinning. Thanks," I managed to say, though the words felt hollow. My eyes flicked back to the TV, but I wasn't really seeing it anymore. My thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I could feel her watching me, her eyes tracing every inch of my face, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Not after that. She stood up abruptly, breaking the silence that had settled over us like a heavy blanket. "I'm going to bed," she said, her voice back to its usual tone. It was almost like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just crossed a line that neither of us knew how to navigate. "Good night," I replied, still staring at the screen, still trying to process everything. As soon as I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. My mind was a jumbled mess of confusion, curiosity, and something else I didn't want to admit to myself. Why had I just sat there? Why hadn't I pulled my hand away? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? The following days were awkward to say the least. I avoided being alone with her as much as possible, finding excuses to stay in my room or leave the house whenever I could. But no matter how hard I tried to avoid her, there was no escaping the tension that hung between us like a dark cloud. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment on the couch, the way her hand had felt on mine, the way her voice had sounded so intimate. And then, one evening, things escalated. It was late, and I had been trying to finish up some homework when she knocked on my door. My heart skipped a beat as I called out, "Come in." She stepped inside, looking a little unsure of herself, which was unusual for her. "Hey," she said softly, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she should come in all the way. "Can you help me with something in the garage?" I hesitated for a moment. Being alone with her felt like stepping into dangerous territory, but I couldn't exactly say no. "Sure," I said, standing up and following her down the hallway. The garage was cold and dimly lit, the only light coming from a single overhead bulb. She led me to a stack of boxes, talking about how she needed to organize them, but her words sounded distant. My mind was too focused on the way the air between us seemed to crackle with tension. As we stood side by side, moving boxes around, I could feel the space between us shrinking, even though we hadn't moved any closer physically. It was like there was this unspoken pull drawing us together, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it was becoming impossible to deny. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye, and our gazes met for just a second. But in that second, something shifted. There was something in her eyes, something vulnerable and raw, and it made my stomach flip. Without warning, she stepped closer. Her hand brushed against mine, sending a jolt through my entire body. I froze, unsure of what to do, my mind screaming at me to step back, to say something, to stop this. But I didn't move. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I've been worried about you lately. I just want to make sure you're okay." My heart pounded in my chest, and I didn't know how to respond. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words got stuck in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then, before I knew what was happening, she leaned in. The space between us felt charged, but I couldn't figure out why. Warm and soft. My mind went blank as her eyes searching mine for answers I didn't have, and in that moment, everything else faded away. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but there was no stopping what was happening. Not anymore. The next few moments felt like a blur, as if time itself had slowed down, trapping me in this surreal space where everything was happening too quickly and yet not fast enough. Her face was so close to mine, her breath warm on my skin, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. My thoughts were tangled, a confusing mess of emotions that I couldn't even begin to sort through. All I knew was that something irreversible was about to happen, and there was no stopping it. Her eyes locked onto mine, searching, waiting for some kind of sign, some kind of permission that I wasn't sure I was ready to give. But before I could think, before I could even react, she placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch gentle but filled with unspoken emotion. It wasn't like anything I'd ever felt before. My entire body, tensed as the reality of the moment, crashed over me, but I didn't pull away. I couldn't. There was something magnetic, something unspoken between us that kept me frozen in place. It was only for a second, but in that second, the world seemed to shift. Everything around us faded. The garage, the boxes, the cold air, none of it mattered anymore. All that existed was the feeling of her lips against mine, gentle yet overwhelming, like something I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Fear, confusion, maybe even regret. But then, before I could say anything, before I could process what had just happened, she kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. It was deeper, more intense, and suddenly everything felt more real, more dangerous. I felt my heart racing, pounding so loudly in my ears that I was sure she could hear it too, but I still didn't pull away. Instead, I found myself leaning into the kiss, my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of what was happening. It was as if some invisible barrier between us had shattered, And now there was no turning back. The tension in the room grew, and I could feel the weight of her unspoken words hanging in the air. There was a strange kind of desperation in the way she held on to me, like she was afraid to let go, like she needed this as much as I did. But there was no time to think about that. No time to question the feelings surging through me. All I could do was feel, caught in the storm of emotions that had suddenly taken over. And then, without warning, we stumbled backward, out of the garage and into the house. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us louder than any words could have been. It was like we both knew what was coming next, but neither of us had the courage to say it out loud. We ended up in the living room, the same place where all of this had started. The dim light from the TV cast long shadows across the room, making everything feel even more surreal. My pulse quickened as she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving mine. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for what was next. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If it touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Levy Stories. Your support means the world to me and encourages me to bring more impactful, real-life stories just like this one. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you at the next video.